out in just a little bit, and so I better keep moving or we'll never get past verse 5. And Steve will never have me in his class again. I love being in Steve's classes. I will never have as much energy as he has in his classes, but uh, I so somebody read. Let's keep going. Somebody read verses 6 through 14. David.
There was a man sent from God whose name was John. The same came for a witness, to bear witness of the light, that all men through him might believe. He was not that light, but was sent to bear witness of that light. That was the true light, which lighteth every man that cometh into the world. He was in the world, and the world was made by him, and the world knew him not. He came unto his own, and his own received him not. But as many as received him, to them he gave power to become the sons of God, even to them that believe on his name, which were born not of blood, nor of the will of the flesh, nor of the will of man, but of God. And the Word was made flesh and dwelt among us, and we beheld his glory, the glory as of the only begotten of the Father, full of grace and truth.
All I can say to that is good stuff. So the second part of the first chapter of John, he introduces John the Baptizer. He does that, and then he really keeps talking about Jesus for a while before he really gets back into John the Baptizer. But in these verses, it tells us a lot more about who the Word was, who Jesus was. What else do we know? What else does John want us to know about Jesus from these verses?
That he came to a world that wouldn't accept him, to a people that wouldn't accept him. Their decision was, this can't be what he says it is. It just can't be.
And there's a great irony in that, he says, because Jesus was the one that created them. He created the world, and yet the people in the world didn't accept him. Even, it says, even his own didn't accept him. So there's a great irony in that, is that he was the creator, but not accepted. A lot of that goes back to their notion of what a Messiah was. They were expecting something completely different than what Jesus, the true Messiah, was. Anything else you see in those verses, Mike?
What Dave just said reminds me of, I can't remember where I heard it, but it's a truism that you don't know where you're going until you know where you've been. And that's also a geometric truth. One point does not make a line or a vector. You need more than 1 point. So you need at least 2 points to know which way you're heading. And in genealogy, it was so important to the Jews to know their genealogy. But in many cases, they didn't know their story, or they didn't own their story. And in many cases, we don't either. If we disregard our creation as mankind, we will be no better than these people were. They didn't accept him because they didn't embrace where they came from, and they didn't listen to all the points of reference that had been presented to them through the ages.
And I think that's the reason. I mean, this is the framework that he's going to build his gospel on. When he starts talking about Jesus's interactions, it's not just that he started them. He's got a big history behind him for them to realize who he was. We need to know about where he came from, and that's a big point for John.
he really drives home that Jesus is the light of man. He is why we have anything we have. And then doubles on the what happens if we believe by saying we are given the power to become the sons of God.
Yeah, not only was Jesus everything, but he gives us a sense of everything as well. And that's where is that an amazing statement or what? And it's because of him.
Right. It's through Jesus now. Now the only way we can be called children of God is through Jesus.
One of my, I hate to say it's favorite verse because I have way too many of those, but in 1 John, I mean, he starts out by saying, how great is the love the Father has lavished on us that we should be called the children of God. And that's what we are. He said, and so John loves the concept of us being children of God, but he says it's only because of Jesus that can even be possible.
Prior to this time, even God's own people didn't consider themselves the people of God. They considered themselves the children of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and Moses. They had Moses for their father. They had Abraham for their father. What did they need Jesus for?
Yeah, and that's a big change in point of reference about how we view how they viewed who they were.
Yeah, I think that their biggest problem, the Jews, is that their whole concept was that Jesus, their Messiah, was going to come and give them a physical revolution over the Romans. He was going to come and save them physically. And Jesus came and it was all spiritual. They didn't want to have anything to do with that because they weren't getting what they wanted.
And that's a really good point. And that's a good segue into the notion of John now. And I'm going to ask you to just read that part of it. You're already pretty aware of what that says about John. John the Baptizer came, and so now John the author switches focus for a little bit onto John the Baptizer, and in this scheme, why does he doesn't really right away talk about what John did or why does he bring up the subject, do you think, of John the Baptizer right now in this first chapter?
Baptizer tells everybody this is the one, this is the Lamb of God. He identifies the Messiah.
And I think that's it. John has gone and said, this is who Jesus was. And then he says, this is who John was. And he says right away that he was sent from God. So we can't discount him. But on the other hand, he says, this is who John wasn't. He says, I think in verse 8, he wasn't the light. John said the light was going to be bigger than he was. He said, I'm not Elijah. He says, I'm not a prophet, and I'm most certainly not the creator. I am not the Messiah. And so he contrasts John's role as God sent into what he wasn't with what Jesus was. And so Steve wanted me to point out, because I didn't realize this, that the description Lamb of God only appears twice in the New Testament, and they're both here in John chapter 1. Nobody else calls him that. Lamb of God. There are I wanted to talk about this for a long time, but we don't have time to do that. But that's, and it's like, this is John's calling card for Jesus. Every time he sees Jesus, he says, behold the Lamb of God. You get to thinking that whenever he saw Jesus around, that's what he thought. And the first time when he sees Jesus coming, he says, behold the Lamb of God. And then what follows that? Who takes away the sin of the world. And for me, this may be just kind of a minor, it's not the sins of the world, not the accumulated sins of you and me, but he takes away sin, the source of sin. It goes back to darkness versus light. He does away with the source of sin. That's why he came into the world. And John understands that, and he understands where his position is. So next week, sorry, Steve, we only got through 2/3 of the first chapter. There are many callings that take place. There are at least 5 people, and they come to Jesus in very different ways. And for me, it says just how this whole notion is good news, right? The fact that Jesus comes in and that the darkness can't overcome him. And you get the sense that when John starts losing disciples and they come to Jesus, that there is an excitement there that is good news. And that's where I'm going to leave you. And again, Steve, come reset next week. Take the class. I just sent it off its rails, but we'll keep going. John 1 is a great study, and thank you all for your comments this morning.